Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of you for participating in the People's Law School over the last 23 or 24 hours. It has been a real privilege for us, and tonight we have almost the entire People's Law School faculty here to answer some questions. I don't know how many we've got, but anyway, tonight about 10 lawyers will answer the questions that you, the students, have asked us.
Y'all remember me, the conservative dresser. These are pretty tough questions, I might add. I want to just take a minute to just say I had a very limited exposure to the People's Law School, but I think Alan Brinkley and Richard Chestnut and Dan Aldrich and the others did a mighty fine job in putting this program together, and I think they deserve a round of applause. Are you taking questions from the...
Yeah, whatever.
Yes. Is it in my field?
If you had the authority to revise statutes related to drunk driving in the state of Alabama, what revisions would you implement?
Is that your field?
That just happens to be a field that I'm very familiar with.
Is that your dad?
What revision? Thanks, Dad. Thanks, Uncle Jim. I personally am for tougher, stricter laws as it relates to drunk driving.
Is that your dad?
Thank you, Alan. It seems obvious. I talked to you when I was here the night of a tornado. Some of you missed that, about the many problems we have with divorce and how it's burdening our system. And Phil has talked to you about the problems you all have recognized with DUI. It's fairly obvious if we didn't have whiskey and women, we wouldn't have these drunk driving and divorce problems, right? So therein lies the problem. I can get to the heart of it. This was, some of these questions were just assigned to me by Bob Gammons. I walked over to the table a while ago and he was shuffling the cards and Bob just flung this on me. And who wrote these? Ron, did you write these questions, or Al? This is that in the event an individual is falsely arrested by the state, can the individual recoup the money from the state he spent on attorney's fees? Example, can O.J. get his attorney's fees back from the state of California? Well, that's going to be a difficult question because his attorneys by the end of this trial will own the state of California. No problem.
Lawyers necessary to participate in divorce actions even with no children or property involved. Under those circumstances, and of course you can imagine they really are very rare, you have the right to represent yourself in any legal proceeding. But my best advice would be to at least have an attorney draft the documents.
There's no
for both
standard
people.
forms in the courthouse you can go fill out?
Well, there are standard forms. They can, no, there's not a form that you fill out and present to the court. Divorces are part of the public record, and the records are kept here in the courthouse. I suppose you could go and take a peek at it and see how someone else has done it, or this might be a good example where the law library would be a good resource for you.
Know any standard marriages?
Well, this case I just mentioned, I don't know if that's standard or not, where you just say one.
Well, it's very rare for there's to be no children and no property involved. You know, you'd really almost have to have two homeless people.
Well, I think either you or Dee, when you had presented your case, you cited some examples, or Dee, one of you did, about the couple comes in and they both mutually agree, and here's how we're going to divvy up, and everybody's rather to sign.
Well, it still requires an attorney to prepare the documents.
Okay, you can't come to the judge yourself, is what you're saying.
Well, you're required to file certain documents. So, and we don't give those secrets away. Yes?
Back there, Sue.
Oh, okay.
Of common law marriage, what constitutes marriage? How do you know that you're married or not married?
Well, the requirements for common law marriage are primarily that you hold yourself out as being married. If you consider yourself to be married without having gone through a ceremony, then you have a common law marriage. The problem arises when one party thinks they have a common law marriage and the other doesn't.
This was going to talk about the gulag we call real estate.
Or anything else. Phil Price said to make it short because real estate was so boring. I can't help but agree, but there are an awful lot of questions here, and unfortunately Bob Gammon's answered all the easy ones, so I don't know. Maybe we just tell jokes. That's a very superficial.
Responsible on right-of-ways. Road right-of-ways.
Highway, the highway department, the city, the county, state.
Property, there's a street and a curb, and then your property begins,
You are.
you know,
You are.
10 feet behind.
You are. You are.
That's by city ordinance?
No, sir. That's just practicality. If you don't do it, nobody is. When you're traveling across private property, either walking or riding, at what time does it become perfectly legal to do so? Does the phrase perfectly legal, does that offend somebody? I don't know. Is that like an oxymoron? Army intelligence, free will Baptist, I'm not sure, you know what, that doesn't really go there. I don't know that if you're going across private property, if it's ever perfectly legal for you to do that unless you've got permission to do that, or unless you have done it for so long that you've established a prescriptive easement, and that takes 20 years. So I wouldn't do it. I can't advise that. By the way, do y'all know what you get when you cross a lawyer with a mafia godfather? A mafia godfather? You get an offer that you can't understand. And that may be what we're doing here tonight. That's all I have.
Gusty Yearout is a lawyer in Birmingham. He has practiced there for over 2 decades and is a well-known trial lawyer. He graduated from Auburn University in 1967. He holds the distinction and the honor, by the way, of being the only Auburn football player who was elected captain of his team his junior year in 1966, and he was also elected captain of the football team in 1967, 2 years in a row. So that'll tell you what his peers think about him. And it is our pleasure tonight and a real honor to have Gusty Yearout here speak with us. Gusty.
Thank you for having me here tonight. Here's the introduction. I wrote this afternoon and give it back. Before I get started on the very interesting topic of corporations, and we're going to try to make it interesting tonight, a lot of people ask me, why did you become a lawyer? And how did you become a lawyer? And it kind of goes back to what Alan was talking about when I was at Auburn, and I felt like it was good advice. I'd always wanted to be a lawyer, but I was like any other football player. When I got through playing football, I thought, you got to go in coaching. I mean, that's what you got to do. And I went to see Coach Jordan, and by that time, I had had a fairly good career, and I had demonstrated some leadership ability, and I was fairly intelligent. So I went to him and I said, Coach, I want to know if you'll hire me. And I want you to hire me for a year or 2 years to see if I like it. And then, if I don't like it, I'll go to law school. And he said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, the coaching profession seems glamorous. He said, but you go to law school for 1 year or 2 years. If you don't like it, then you come back, and I'll hire you. And thank goodness it worked out the way it did, because I probably was an offensive line coach somewhere. Another thing I want to tell you before we get to this, the Auburn-Alabama rivalry has gone on. I know the Auburn people here and Alabama people here. And when I was in school, they taught us to hate Alabama. And I mean hate that red color, hate the people that wore it, do everything you can to win the game. It didn't matter what it was, be mean, tough. And frankly, I had a lot of friends of mine that played for them. But anyway, before the game, the Auburn-Alabama game in 1967, I was the captain of the team, and right before we go out for the halftime coin toss, they tell us, I want you mad, I want you angry, I want you intimidating. And so I'm walking out there, and I'm angry, and I'm intimidating, and my eyes have got little slits like that, and I am fixing to stare somebody down, like those boxers you see get in the ring, and they're looking at each other like that. And we get out to the center of the field, and Kenny Stabler was the Alabama captain, and they had a bunch of them. And we walk up, and I'm giving him the evil eye and the black eye, and the official's about to start introducing. He says, Gus, he said, what are y'all doing after the game? He said, we got a party room at the bank here. And he said, I want you, we got our dates, get your dates, whoever you want to bring them down there. And I'm still looking at him, you know. And the official's trying to say, Captain, this is Captain Stapler, and there's some other ones out there. And he keeps on, he tells me who's going to be there and what room it is. And I can't hear anything the official's saying. I'm listening to him. And finally, he keeps on talking, and I say, what time? And he go back, they won that game, anyway.
So that's kind of my government 101 speech that I would give if all of you were freshmen down at Auburn, where I taught for a while in Montgomery. I don't want to hear any Auburn jokes tonight. I've heard all of those that I can stand. There are a lot of folks out there who I'm sure will be watching this one day that probably graduated from Auburn like I did, so I'm not going to hear any Auburn jokes, but I won't hear any Alabama jokes either. I will tell you one story, though, about no one can be a politician in Alabama and not have an Auburn, Alabama joke. Many years ago, when my 19-year-old son was, in fact, he was about 9, where my other son is now, we went to all the Auburn games. That was kind of that was kind of the thing that we did on weekends. Our family activity would all go to the Auburn games and, you know, tailgate and eat chicken salad sandwiches and all those things that us Auburn fans do at Auburn games. We went to this Alabama-Auburn game was up at Legion Field, and we went there and, you know, got to the last second, and Auburn was going to win. My son was there with his orange and blue shaker and his orange and blue hat and his orange and blue pants and so forth. We were really big into this. And so someone, I'm sure, kicked this field goal that went it looked like 80 yards. I think it was probably 50 yards. An impossible kick. We all just said, ha, he'll never make this. Well, he did, right up to the uprights. And my son looked up at me with a big old tear, streaming down his face, and he threw his pom-pom down on the ground, and he said, my goodness, why didn't you go to Alabama?
He was also the district attorney of the 39th Judicial Circuit, which is Athens. And I'm sure we will learn a lot about what he's got to say. I will tell you one story I know about John Plunk, and that is when he was in college, he was in charge of Law Day, and he was determined he would have the best speaker there for the law school at the University of Alabama. So he called F. Lee Bailey and demanded that he come, and F. Lee Bailey refused to come unless John Plunk would give him a personal dinner and private dinner with Bear Bryant. So so by golly, John Plunk went straight to Bear Bryant and arranged for that meeting. And John can tell you about that meeting. It was a fascinating event. And I hope he'll tell you a little bit about it tonight. John Plunk.
Thank you, Alan. What I found out that night was that F. Lee Bailey could drink more whiskey than Coach Bryant. I worked for Coach Bryant for the athletic department for about 3 years at that time, so it wasn't a great trick, really. Coach Bryant was as interested and eager to meet F. Lee Bailey as F. Lee Bailey was to meet Coach Bryant. So they had a good time, and we all sat over in the corner and watched the two of them brag and tell stories. And of course, F. Lee Bailey, I don't know if you can tell on television, but he's not very big. He's probably about that tall. And Coach Bryant was a big man. I was interested to hear Mr. Simpson talking about vote buying. I was reminded my family, my dad is from West Tennessee, from McNairy County, the home of Buford Busser, home of Albert Brewer, and the home of the Plunks, which you probably hadn't heard much about the Plunks before tonight. You've heard of those other folks. But I remember my grandfather telling stories, or really my father telling stories about when he was 10 or 12 years old, going out on the night before elections with his father and my uncle, who was about 10 years old, and they would go out all night delivering moonshine whiskey to prospective voters, and they would get in just before daylight and have time to wash off in the creek or whatever. They didn't have indoor plumbing where he was raised. And they would have time then to get down to the polling place, which was sounded like to me, a peach stand, like you'd see on the side of the road. That was the polling place in that little town. And my grandfather would hand out silver dollars as people went into the polling place. You know, he knew how they voted. I don't know. At least he got a promise as they went in. So my family's had somewhat checkered history in politics. My grandfather on my mother's side was from Jackson County, and he was involved in politics over there, and my great-grandfather was sheriff. And the one story I remember about them in 1946, I guess, when Bob Jones was first elected to Congress. Of course, he was from Jackson County, and his opponent, Mr. Smith, was from Colbert County. They were good friends. They campaigned together, rode around the same car, which you couldn't imagine happening today. But on election night, they couldn't get the results from Jackson County. And it was because Jackson County wanted to see how many votes Bob Jones needed to get elected. And that particular election, Jackson County voted 99% of the registered voters voted, and 98% of them voted for Bob Jones, and he was elected. My grandfather played some small part in that, so I'm not in politics.
The benefit of the people who may be watching this at some time in the future and won't have the handout, I'm going to read a part of Robert's biographical sketch for you. Robert has defended many accused persons of high and low estate, famous, infamous, and obscure, in state and federal courts. He has defended public officials, elected office holders, municipal corporations, attorneys, physicians, and police, as well as bikers, nude dancers, farmers, drunks, and alcoholics. Grandmothers and 4 dirty movies also. He likes to quote his father, who says, "There's enough good in the worst of us and enough bad in the best of us that it behooves us to talk about the rest of us." Our next speaker is obviously the master of the understatement and of the picture of humility, and also a very good lawyer, Robert Earl Patterson.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard, for those laudatory comments. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and especially so to see a few old friends I haven't seen in a while and to see a real good turnout. It is my job tonight to talk about search and seizure law, or what we affectionately refer to in law school as Marijuana 101. So Terry versus Ohio gives the police that right. Now, I'm not telling you we live in a police state. Don't get me wrong. I love the United States of America. I'm not leaving. I love Huntsville, Alabama. I was born right here. I haven't made it very far. So I'm sticking around. But while I'm here, I'm going to exercise my First Amendment rights. Thank you very much. All right, those are some of the many exceptions to the search warrant requirement. So when the folks come in and say they didn't have a search warrant, it doesn't always mean victory. Next thing that they always come in and say is, the police did not read me my rights. And I've been watching television for a long time, and if you're not lawyer enough to win this case, I'm spreading it around town.
But I do want to give you some illustrations about evidence. And there's evidence in this courtroom. It's all around you, and when I sat down over here, I saw a piece of evidence. And I got to wondering, now what is that evidence of? And then I started thinking about the things that take place in this courtroom and have taken place in courtrooms all over America every day since we started having juries and we started having deliberations and giving facts to jurors to make determinations. And I looked over and I saw it. That chair. Now, what do you think that's evidence of? Now, what's happened is that somebody's been sitting in this chair listening to see what the jury's saying in there when they're talking about the case. Now, if you don't think that happens, you come up here. That happens to be the jury room over there. But we used to, when the judges used to let us do it and they wouldn't get mad about it, they wouldn't tell you you could do it, but we'd lean up against them, get our ear up against them, go in the next room, listen through the transoms, everything. So if you believe that the juries make decisions based on evidence, let me tell you a little story. We were trying a case and it had a lot of funny things in it, and years ago we all talked about the good old days, and they weren't so good for some people. We used to indict people on Friday afternoon, appoint them a lawyer on Monday morning and try them at 10 o'clock for capital murder, but you know, that wasn't so good. But there were some things in the good old days, and we had a train wreck case over here at 5 Points when the Bonaire restaurant was there. Does anybody remember the Bonaire restaurant? And that curve there, and it was a 5 Points that all came together, and my client happened to be sitting at the second intersection. The train's coming and it passes a road here and it comes by and it goes by where my client was. Didn't take a lot of depositions back then. Nowadays they take depositions, they know what everybody's going to say. File that's supposed to be this thick in 7 file drawers. But anyway, we put my client's daughter on the stand, and she was going to testify. I didn't have any idea what she was going to say. And she said, we were sitting in the car, and she said, I looked up and I told Mama, I said, look yonder, Mama, there's a train coming around that curve. She said, Mama said, well, okay. She said, yeah, but that car up there sitting on the track is going to hit that car. She said, well, if a car's sitting on the track, it ought to hit it. And she said, about that time it hit us. So my client was in the car, she was sitting on the track too, and it missed us and it hit them. So after the case was over, Judge Mayhall, who came up here to help us try a bunch of sewer cases from Jasper, great fella, older fella, old gentleman, he'd get started giving a charge and his mouth would just get thicker and thicker. But anyway, he was charging the jury on that case, and there was a curve there, and there were some houses in that curve, and you couldn't see the intersection for the houses as a train came around the curve. I don't remember the statute exactly what it said, but the statute, the law says, when a train's approaching an intersection in the city limits or in a town, it can't approach that intersection any faster than it would take for it to be able to stop when it has a clear view of the intersection, which means, I guess I didn't say it too good, that train coming around that curve where those houses were, or where it didn't have a clear view, whether it was houses or whether it was a bank or whether it was trees or what, it had to approach that intersection in a way that when that intersection became clear, that train could stop. Okay, judge charged the jury, told the jury that. Well, that curve was there, and those houses were there, and when the train came around the curve, it saw those people on the track and it couldn't stop. And that was our big argument. That's just about all the argument we had when we were sitting on the track. So the jury goes out. So I get my position in the chair, and I'm listening to the jury, and I hear them in there arguing. And finally one of the people said, listen, said, you heard the judge. Now you remember they're supposed to be deciding this case on the evidence that comes from the stand. Say, listen, you heard the judge. You heard that judge say that the law says that train's not supposed to go any faster around that curve than it could stop when it had a clear view of that intersection. Somebody said, yeah, I heard him. But I also heard him say that was a law according to the code book of 1940 as recompiled in 1958. And them houses probably wasn't even there in 1940. I walk in there, I get up, and I walk out of that chair, and I go in there and tell Judge Mayhall what I heard. He said, you ain't supposed to be listening. I said, yeah, I know I ain't supposed to be listening, but they not supposed to decide it on that, and if they'd come back with a defense verdict, I want you to set it aside. He said, well, let's see what they did, and they gave us $11,000, so we dodged that. And that was a big verdict back then, too.
Lynn Jenks.
Thank you, Alan. I want to tell you how delighted I am to be here tonight. This is the first time in my legal career that I've been able to speak to people in a jury box without having to worry about an objection from opposing counsel or having a judge sustain that objection. So there's no telling what I might say tonight. There's one thing that has troubled me about this subject matter, which is the rights of consumers. That's what I'm going to speak to you about tonight. And what has troubled me is this. For the last several months in trying to get together this presentation, I've not been able to think of a single good consumer law joke to tell you. But listening to Buck Watson tonight, who preceded me at this podium, I thought of a bunch of good evidence jokes. So I just tell some of those. Years ago, we had a trial down in South Alabama. That's where I live, in small town South Alabama. A fellow was being tried for harassment. Now, back in those days, people were less tolerant than they are today of certain types of conduct. What this man had done, he'd gone into a bar, he'd had a few drinks, one too many. He came out of the bar and he propositioned a young lady. And he did it in a rude and offensive manner, and thus the charge of harassment. He's being tried before a jury. Well, they had the victim on the stand. She was testifying. She was tearfully recounting the events of that evening. And the district attorney said, well, ma'am, tell this jury what this defendant said to you that offended you so. She said, I can't tell that. I'd be too embarrassed. It was awful, just awful. I just can't say the words. And so they had a little sidebar conference, and they went back, and the judge said, well, ma'am, I tell you what you do. I understand your reluctance to say those words in the manner that he propositioned you, but just write down the way that he propositioned you. And we'll pass that note around and let the jury read what the man told you. So she did. She wrote it down, word for word, just like he had told her, and gave it to one of the jurors, and they started passing that note around. Well, there was an old fellow on the back row of the jury who had slept through most of the trial. In fact, he'd slept through everything that had just happened. And sitting next to him was an attractive young woman. And she looked at the note, and he was asleep, and she punched him, and he woke up, and she handed him the note. He read the note and put it in his shirt pocket. And the judge said, sir, pass that note on. He said, I can't, Judge, it's personal.
Mark McDaniel.
Yeah, I've tried a lot of high-profile cases, and anytime you're introduced to, like Ellen introduced me, I think about the time that I was involved in one of those cases, and my secretary came to one of the high-profile cases. My secretary came to the office, and she said, Time Magazine's on the phone. I said, okay, great. You get kind of tensed up, and you get thinking, what am I going to say? What are they going to ask me about this case? So I go to the phone, and I have me a pad there getting ready to answer the inquiry from Time Magazine. I get on the phone, I said, Smart McDaniel. The person on the other end said, this is Time Magazine. I said, how can I help you? They said, Mr. McDaniel, for the next 6 weeks, you can get Time Magazine for 45 cents a copy.
And I also want to say a special thanks to you, the students of People's Law School, for inviting me to speak tonight. 2 elderly gentlemen were on the beach down in Miami, retired, talking to each other, getting to know one another, and one of them looked at the other one and said, how did you get down here? Second one said, well, I had a business fire, and I made a claim with my insurance company, and I got some money, and that's how I'm down here. How about you? How are you down here? Second guy said, well, I had a fire too, but I also had a flood. The first guy looked at him and said, how do you start a flood? When somebody reports an automobile wreck to us, we send out, we want in writing a brief summary of what happened. Doesn't have to be long, just a sentence or two. And these people over the years have sent these responses back. And he gave them to me, and I looked at them, and they were voluminous, several of them. But along with my office staff, we tried to pare it down, and we came up with what we think are the 10 best responses from people. These are actual, true life, here in the United States, responses to what happened in your automobile wreck. See if this gives the insurance company proper notice. We'll start in reverse fashion. 10 down to 1, 10 down to the best one. The 10th best one. Lady wrote in and said, I was coming home, I drove into the wrong house and collided with a tree I don't have. True story. The 9th best response from a policyholder. I thought my window was down, but I found out it was up when I put my head through it. Now, I hope they meant hand, but they said head. Number 8. An indirect cause of the accident was a little guy in a small car with a big mouth. Number 7, I had been driving for 40 years when I fell asleep at the wheel and had an accident. Number 6, the telephone pole was approaching. I was attempting to swerve out of its way when it struck my front end. Is it any wonder that they think that we are not smart? The 5th best one, well, some of you ladies might recognize this one. I had been shopping for plants all day, and I was on my way home. And as I reached the intersection, a hedge sprang up, obscuring my vision, and I did not see the other car. Number 4, the pedestrian had no idea which direction to run, so I ran over him. The third best, and we're getting down to the good ones now, the third best. Somebody wrote in and said an invisible car came out of nowhere, struck my car and vanished. The second best in the list, the guy was all over the road. I had to swerve a number of times before I hit him. And the best response, in our opinion, to these policyholders' comments was this one. Guy says, I pulled away from the side of the road, glanced at my mother-in-law, and headed over the embankment.
Thank you, Alan. I can see that most all of you people have been through a divorce. That's fairly obvious you turned out on a night like this, because people who have been through a divorce don't think much about coming out in a tornado. Back there in the 50s, it was out in Hollywood. That's where it was, and you heard those. We joked about it. Wasn't a serious matter to us because that's something happened in Hollywood. And you'd hear the jokes. Elizabeth Taylor's husband, who said, he woke her up in the night and said, excuse me, honey, I got to go to the bathroom in a moment. She said, why'd you wake you up? He said, I want you to save my place. Now that's the sort of thing, that's the way we treated it.
My pleasure tonight to present Phil Price.
Good evening. Thank you, Alan, and good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, and to the folks watching on cable TV. I think Comcast does an outstanding job of educating the public in the state of Alabama in the various areas of the law. Alan is quite a guy. You have to get to know him to really dislike him. I'm going to start with some light stuff, if you all don't mind, but the story goes, Alan, a couple of years ago, was leaving a bar here in Huntsville, and from time to time, policemen around here, they do what we call bird dog clubs, and they'll pick out their subject as they're leaving and get them on their way home. And Alan, he comes staggering out to his car, dropped his keys on the ground, picked them up, and went backwards, and finally got in the car and drove off, and the police got him. Well, Alan couldn't do any of the field tests, and they arrested him, took him into the jail, got him on that old breath machine, and he blew into it and went 0, 0, 0. And the officer said, well, what's up with that? Alan, then he sobered up and he says, I was the designated decoy tonight.
But let me tell you one story about George. He and his brother Tommy, and this is a true story. Y'all know Tommy. He's a CPA that works right down the street. Well, George and Tommy Beeson are out in a boat on the Tennessee River a few years ago, and a snake, about 20 yards away, a snake came up out of the water and was looking just like this. So George had his gun with him, a .38, pulled it out, and at 20 yards aimed it at that snake just like this, waited a second, and went bam, and hit that snake right between the eyes. This is a true story. Impressed his little brother, Tommy, for sure. And for years, I've heard all about the story about how George shot the eyes out of the snake. What I didn't know, a friend of mine, Johnny Hall, who's a U.S. Marshal, said, Brinkley, that ain't no big deal. They teach everybody at the FBI Academy, if you ever want to kill a snake, just point your gun at him and he'll line up on you. You can't miss him. So, but when I first heard that story, I thought, wow, that's George Beeson. Because he did go to the FBI Academy when he first got out of the law school.
It is indeed an honor to be here
today, and I think this is just fantastic that we have a group of people that want to get together and study the law a little bit. I have been accused from time to time of only telling about cases where I won. And if that occurs tonight, that is because I'm only going to tell you about the cases I won.
Let me mention one other thing that really generates a little bit of heat, and that's alimony. Guys can't stand it. The girls like it. I love it. And I have more fun with it.
The presumption of innocence that our forefathers, remember, our forefathers were revolutionaries. The men who would now be in disrepute in this country were revolutionaries. George Washington was a rich man. He was willing to risk it all, risk everything he had in the world, all of his farms and all of his land and all of everything he had, to fight against tyranny.
The only thing that binds our country together and our system of laws and rules together is the technical aspects of a constitution. And the fact that in order to change our constitution, it's going to take a lot of people and a lot of time, a lot of effort in order to change it, and it should not be changed helter-skelter or just however somebody wants to do it. It has served us faithfully. It was written by geniuses to be run by idiots, and it is doing a great job for us. And I don't think we ought to change it unless it's absolutely necessary.
A great definition of insanity. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again but expecting a different result. If a real trial lawyer walks in here and says they can hardly wait to their last case, they're not a real trial lawyer. Because it's like the story Knock 'Em Out John by Jerry Clower. Y'all ever hear that? Anybody ever hear that? About these guys are going coon hunting down there, and this is a way of telling the story. These guys were going Ray Bell, Marcel, and somebody Ledbetter. Anyway, they were coon hunters down in swamps in Louisiana. So they were coon hunting one night, and they got on the scent of the biggest coon that they had ever been after in the whole time they'd been hunting. So they finally, their idea was that they were hunting with 40 or 50 dogs. There were 10 men with shotguns, automatic shotguns, and 40 or 50 dogs. And what they do is those dogs would run a coon up one of these great big old pine trees down there in Louisiana, about 60 or 70 feet in the air, and Marcel Ledbetter would take off his shoes and dig his toenails into the tree and climb up that tree 60 or 70 feet where it was pitch dark. You couldn't see a thing. And he would take a stick out of his back, he wore overalls, coveralls, you know what I'm talking about. Take a stick, and he would get out there on that limb and whack, he'd hit that old coon and knock him down there, and that coon would fall 60 or 70 feet, and if he could whip those dogs, they'd let the coon go. That was their idea of sportsmanship. So, he gets up there that night, they tree this great big old coon, he gets up there, he digs his toenails in, he goes up 70 feet, he gets out on that limb, he pulls a stick out, he gets out there, he whack, he hits that thing. Except it ain't a coon. It's a bobcat. What folks in that part of the country call a souped-up wildcat. And all you can hear down below, see, they can't see up there. They're down there saying, "Knock him out, John!" All you can hear is, "Woo! Shoot that thing!" They keep saying, "Knock him out, John!" He keeps saying, "Woo, shoot that thing." The thing goes about 5 minutes, and they finally say, "Well, John said, we can't shoot up there, we might hit you." He said, "Well, shoot up here amongst us, because one of us has got to have relief." And what I'm trying to tell you about a trial is if you get in trial with a sure enough trial, well, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, you want to go to the hospital.
Since it's been mentioned that I'm the only non-attorney, I guess there'll be several instructors here. You can draw from that a conclusion that you have so many attorneys that there won't be any of these lectures that will be based on free speech. You can be assured of that. There may be one other person that's going to be an instructor that's an elected official. I think there's one other judge that might be going to make a presentation. So that puts me and that judge in the category as being politicians. And there's also some choice words for politicians also. Like I heard the other day, one fellow said that if all politicians were laid end to end, that would be good.
Why is it not less expensive for you to bring the neurologist up here to the two attorneys than it is for the expenses to fly two attorneys all the way to Florida and the hotel expense to get that deposition to bring it back? Who pays for that?
Do you know, if I suggested that this neurologist come to Montgomery, Alabama?
Would he not be your expert? Why courtrooms feel that they are purchased?
No.
You understand what I'm saying?
No, ma'am, I don't. But the answer to your question is that I have no way to make that fella come up here from Clearwater, Florida.
Now, anybody got any questions? Or want to throw things? Anybody throw things? Sure. In the legal and the medical acts, and there are special acts for doctors, they have something in the hospital called Q&A. It's quality assurance. That means that if there's an incident in the hospital, a bad one, and they go out and they do an investigation and they look at it, they write a report and they go to the committees and they do all this stuff. Okay, so let's say somebody's dead, okay? Cut their head off with a chainsaw. Okay, let's say that happened. The doctor cut your head off, cut your head with a chainsaw, you're dead. It's over with. They do an investigation, they determine doctor cut off head with a chainsaw. Okay, but for some reason nobody else saw it. And now you're trying to figure out why your client's decapitated when he went in for an appendectomy. Let me give you a good example. Okay, you go into court and you get up in front of these 12 people, these same 12 people, and you say, God Almighty, this doctor just did a horrible thing, or this lawyer did well, he didn't kill anybody, that's pretty rare. Yes,
I think my frustration is the fact that lawyers don't want to take a case unless you talk to big money.
Yeah, that's true, and that is a flaw.
That's why God made small claims court.
See Alan Brinkley's skill of malpractice. Get your pediatrician, head down to district court, and prove it up. And I know your frustration. I'm like Bill Clinton, I know your frustration. I feel your frustration.
What I would like to do is start out by telling you people this, and it's a lesson I learned early on in my judicial career. In fact, it was when I was a district judge. I began in 1982 in that position. And I started reading the statutes that applied to judges, and I soon learned that the wearing of a black robe in court by a judge is required by statute. And it makes you hot, but they like for you to be recognized as the person in the courtroom who is the judge. And so after I was sworn in a choir robe, I ordered mine, and they're just like ministers' robes. They're very pretty. They have braid down the back and all that sort of thing. And I was young and excited about being a judge, and I couldn't wait for mine to come in. So, and I thought, well, now maybe everybody will be able to tell the difference between me and everybody else in the courtroom. So I had just received mine that day and put it on, and it fit. And I went out into my courtroom. We were going to have an eviction proceeding. And the young defendant who had allegedly not paid his rent was already in the courtroom. And the very elderly lady called Miss Louise by her two friends who helped her into the courtroom was the landlady, allegedly. And she was alleging he had not paid his rent and he was due to be evicted from the house. So we were waiting on lawyers, and naturally we were waiting on lawyers. We're always waiting on lawyers. And you know, that clock's ticking, boy, I'm telling you, and their clients are paying for it. But be that as it may, I called my secretary from the bench and told her to bring me some files so I could sign some things that she had prepared and not waste too much time. She brought me those things, And the trio at the back of the room, the man and the woman along with Miss Louise, started whispering to each other in an effort to uphold the dignity of the courtroom, I suppose. And it appeared that they were all very hard of hearing, so they whispered like you do in a sawmill. You know what I'm talking about. And after they got through whispering about several things, the elderly gentleman pointed at me and said, "Louise, is that the judge?" And she looked at me and peered and she said, "No, that's just some woman." Yeah, she lost her case.
There was an appellate judge, or is one, named Anthony Scalia on the Supreme Court, and he gave this definition of judges. He said, trial judges preside over the battle of the plains. Appellate judges are a tribe who live in the hills and ride down after the battle and kill all the survivors. Supreme Court justices are like the Court of Appeal judges, except that they have less compunction and they shoot the women and children as well. Think about it.
It's not really a story, it's just a truism that has happened in my life. I taught public schools for a period of 7 years after I graduated from the University of Alabama. And I taught 7th grade and 8th grade Spanish and English. And of course you had to teach them English before you could teach them Spanish. And I think I was too young and too immature to bring it off. I was only 22 and some of them were not that far behind me. And I eventually left the public schoolroom clinging to my sanity by a thread and decided I'd go to law school. And now I have grown up to become a judge and discovered that all the bad boys in school grew up to be lawyers.
Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to share with you some statistics I heard. I heard a couple of days ago that it had been proven that 99% of the lawyers gave all the others a bad name.
It's a good question. And I actually was going to research that question, thinking that might come up tonight, or I was going to bring it up myself. I'm serious. I'm even funny when I'm not trying to be funny.
And so, but adultery is probably down about 5th. The reason is that if a man's prone to run around, if a woman stays with him long enough, he'll quit. We have the problem of drugs and alcohol. They're sort of in there everywhere. You come along and I ask people, is it drugs or alcohol involved? And they say, well, he drinks a little. I had one lady say, oh yes, said he buys a 6-pack every Friday night and by Monday he's drunk the whole thing. I said, ma'am, go home. He's a wonderful husband. Don't. You got your jewel there. So.
As the story goes, the man and wife left home, and they happened to go by a police officer just about the time that the husband was exceeding the speed limit and about the time he was reaching for his seatbelt to fasten it. Well, he got stopped by the police, and the police pulled him over and says, you know, I got you for speeding. I'm going to have to write you up for not having your seatbelt fastened. The fellow says, I had my seatbelt fastened. I always fasten my seatbelt. The first thing me and my wife do when we get in the car is we fasten our seatbelt. If you don't believe me, ask my wife. He says, what about it, ma'am? She says, I've learned not to argue with him when he's drunk.
One time I was standing by a client, and I think it was in this courtroom here. Now, we had plea bargained, and the client was pleading guilty. And the judge always asked the client, did you retain him or was he appointed? And in this particular case, the client said, I bought him. Not me. Another time I was standing in this courtroom, and another thing, you know, the clients, we'd worked out some kind of negotiated plea, and we was pleading him guilty. And the judge always asked the client about the services of his lawyers. And, you know, how did you lawyer? Are you pleased with the services of your lawyer? Now, you know, the reason they ask him that is because if things don't turn out right, they come turn around and sue the lawyer, obviously. So they asked this particular client of mine, we standing up, and the judge said, are you pleased with the services of your lawyer? And he said, Judge, I don't know. He said, I'll tell you after you sentence me. But the best one I've had is, and this is true, I'm not telling you false stories, these true stories. This lady called me up, and this has been about 6 months ago, and she asked me, she said, Mr. McDaniel, she said, I want to hire you to represent my boy in a robbery case. I said, yes, ma'am. I'll be glad to talk to you. She said, well, before I talk to you, I want to know one thing. I said, yes, ma'am. She says, you good as Matlock? And I said, well, I don't think Matlock's ever lost a case, ma'am. I said, I don't think he was good. She said, well, can you give me his number? And I said, I don't know. I guess you call Hollywood. I don't know, you know. But that's that's the life of a criminal lawyer.
It's an honor for me to participate in it. Frankly, I think you're to be commended for participating in it. Anytime we can have an informed citizenry, we all benefit from that. And we appreciate your participation in this program.
We won't be effective if we can't convince ourselves. I remember when I was a young prosecutor, we had a prosecutor here in this town named Ed Green. Ed was one of these consummate prosecutors. He felt like everybody ought to live in the jail and get a pass when they were good. A wit affair with a careless air. Sat herself in a lawyer's chair. Her morning gown indeed was rare, cut low up here and high down there. Now the lawyer man, a modest soul, he looked here, he looked there, and his eyes did roll as he pulled a will from a pigeonhole. And thinking the while of a modest fee, he looked intently at her and said, you have a nice fat legacy. The next day, as he lay in bed, 1/3 live and 2/3 dead with broken arms and bandaged head, he wondered what it was he had said.
In the courtroom, justice is blind. But in our communities, many people seek a different kind of justice, civil justice, the opportunity to have food and shelter, health care, a quality education, a safe environment, and the chance to work. This justice, civil justice, requires that we remove the blindfold and open our eyes to the needs around us. As advocates for justice, lawyers see the needs of Alabama's children and families every day. In the early 90s, attorney Bob Roden, at that time a committee chair of the Alabama Trial Lawyers Association, saw a way for those who often represent the least fortunate to help them more directly. His plan, supported by the association, authorized lawyers to allocate interest from their trust accounts to a nonprofit foundation created to serve the state's most vulnerable citizens. In 1992, the Alabama Civil Justice Foundation was born. By providing funds to charitable organizations throughout the state, the foundation provides a way for lawyers to reach outside the courtroom and into the community to help solve and prevent many of the tragedies threatening the well-being of our state's neediest citizens. Since 1993, the foundation has awarded grants totaling more than $1.5 million to organizations in all 67 counties in Alabama. Participation has grown from 50 attorneys in 1993 to nearly 1,000 today. Grants have been awarded to hundreds of worthy organizations serving the needs of the disadvantaged, disabled, and at risk. Through the collaboration of many individuals and agencies, the foundation serves a vision of civil justice that embraces all humanity. The hands of justice comfort and heal, build on our strengths as individuals and as communities, make the small gestures that lead to big differences.
I was in second grade. I had just started school and I had this special teacher named Miss Cook, and we were at my lunchtime. And then these DHR people come in and took me, and I put up the biggest fight getting in the car. I think they had to use a crowbar to put me in there. I wouldn't want to go in there, and they took me off. I went from 6 different foster homes in 1 month. One lady kept me for a day and shipped me off. Then I ended up here. Been here ever since.
We've been in existence now for over 130 years. Presbyterian Home is not an orphanage. It's a therapeutically oriented program to serve emotional and spiritual and psychological and social needs of the whole person. The Alabama Civil Justice Foundation's grant to us was a godsend. We have computers at Hope Academy that are the very center of the educational process. They're an indispensable tool.
I used to make like F's and D's. Now I'm like a straight A and B student. I would rather go to this school than any school in the world.
From large programs to smaller ones, the organizations supported by the foundation are making a tremendous difference in the lives of thousands of our state's neediest citizens. What does it take to make a difference? What does a foundation grant mean to the people who benefit from them? The voice of justice speaks from the heart.
That's about the only thing I want to change with my life, was to know who my father was.
Expresses hope and possibility.
And it was just a great feeling because I said to myself, I finally won, I got him.
Leads to understanding. Connects us all.
I just enjoy being over here with other kids and grown-ups that have the same disability as I do, so I can learn different sports from them.
And often needs no words at all.